Good morning, fourth graders. Today in math, we're continuing to find equivalent fractions, but we're doing equivalent fractions a little bit differently. We're dealing with fractions that have a denominator of 10 and 100. So these should be pretty quick and easy to do, either using just mental math or just some really quick calculations. We're going to go over the first problem on both pages, and then I'll let you pause the video so you can try the rest on your own, and then we'll come back and go over the answers together. All right, question number 1 on the first page is asking you to find an equivalent fraction to 3/10 that has a denominator of 100 instead of 10. So you need to ask yourself, what did you multiply 10 by to turn it into 100? You always multiply 10 by 10 to turn it into 100. So whatever you do to the bottom, you also need to do to the top. So you're just going to multiply 3 by 10, and you're going to get 3 times 10 is 30. So the numerator would be 30. On all of these problems, if you take a look, you'll see you're dealing with denominators of 10 or 100. On the second page, you're going one step farther and you're adding together two fractions. But this is the first time I've asked you to be challenged, and you're adding together two fractions that have different denominators. So before you can add these fractions together, you have to turn the fractions into two fractions that have the same denominator. So let's take a look at the first problem, and I'll show you two different ways that you could solve this problem. Option 1 is you can keep the fraction 3/10 the same, and you can turn the fraction 30 over 100 into a fraction that has a denominator of 10. So the way that I could do that is I know 30 over 100 could turn into a fraction over 10 if I divided the top and I divided the bottom by 10, because I know 100 divided by 10 equals 10, and then 30 divided by 10 equals 3. When I add those two fractions together, 3/10 plus 3/10, I would get the answer of 6/10. But I can't add them until they have the same denominator. So this is one strategy you could have used to solve this problem. Or what you could have done instead, you could have kept the fraction 30/100 the same, and instead turned 3/10 into a fraction over 100. So if I kept 30/100 the same, then that means that I would need to turn 3/10 into a fraction over 100. So to turn 3/10 into a fraction where the denominator is 100, I'm going to need to multiply the bottom number by 10. Whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do to the top. 3 times 10 equals 30. So my new numerator would be 30 over 100. And then when I added these two fractions together, 30/100 plus 30/100, I would get 60/100. So both of these strategies would have given us the correct answer, but you'll notice our answers looked a little bit different depending on which fraction we changed. So you could have gotten an answer of 60/100 if you turned them both into a fraction with a denominator of 100. Or you could have gotten our original answer, which was 6/10, if you turn them both into a fraction with a denominator of 10. You can choose whichever strategy makes more sense to you. Both of these answers would be correct, even though they look different. So go ahead, pause the video now, come on back when you're done, and we'll go over the answers together. All right, back to the first page. Let's take a look at question number 2. Again, all we are doing is we are turning these into equivalent fractions. So if I had multiplied 5 times 10 to turn it into 50, I need to multiply my denominator of 10 times 10, which would give me a denominator of 100. Question number 3 is similar to the question on page 2, where you needed to add together 4/10 and 20/100. But remember, you can't add these together until they have the same denominator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my 4/10 the same, and I'm going to change 20/100 into 2/10. And I know that that works because that's like dividing the top by 10 and dividing the bottom by 10. So 20/100ths and 2/10ths are equivalent. And then I can add those together and I would get 6/10ths. If you had decided to go the other way and turn 4/10ths into 40/100ths, you would have gotten 60/100ths. So both of those answers would have been correct. Question number 4. You could have either turned 6/10ths into 60/100ths and you would have gotten an answer of 80/100ths. Or you could have turned 20/100ths into 2/10ths and you would have gotten an answer of 8/10ths. So both of those would have been correct. Question number 5, same thing. You could have turned 7/10ths into 70/100ths and gotten an answer of 120/100ths, which is the same as 1 whole and 20/100ths. Or you could have kept 7/10ths the same and turned 50/100ths into 5/10ths, and you would have gotten an answer of 12/10ths, which is the same as 1 whole and 2/10ths. Question number 6, same thing. I could have turned 9/10ths into 90/100ths, and I would have gotten an answer of 100/100, which is the same as 1 whole. Or I could have kept 9/10ths the same, and I could have turned 10/100ths into 1/10th, which would have given me 10/10, which also equals 1 whole. Back to the top on the opposite side. We're going back to finding equivalent fractions. So what fraction is equivalent to 7/10ths that has a denominator of 100? I need to multiply my denominator by 10. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. And I know 7 times 10 equals 70. Question number 8, same thing. I'm turning this into an equivalent fraction. How did I turn 2 into 20? I multiplied it by 10. Whatever I do to the top, I have to do to the bottom. 10 times 10 equals 100. Question number 9, we're adding 2 fractions again, and these fractions have different denominators. So you have to choose. Do you want to turn your denominators into 10 or into 100? If I turn them into 100, 6/10ths would turn into 60/100ths. 60 plus 80 equals 140/100. And that is the same as 1 whole and 40/100ths. Or I could have kept 6/10ths the same and changed 80/100ths into 8/10ths and added those together and gotten 14/10ths, which equals 1 whole and 4/10ths. Question number 10. I have 3/10ths plus 30/100ths. If I turned 3/10ths into something over 100, I would have gotten 30/100ths. And adding those together, my answer would have been 60/100. Or I could have kept 3/10ths the same and turned 30/100ths into 3/10ths. And when I added those together, I would have gotten 6/10ths. So both of those answers would have been correct. Question number 11, I could have turned 4/10ths into 40/100ths. 40 plus 70 equals 110/100. Because that's improper, the top number is larger than the bottom. That's the same as 1 whole and 10/100. Or I could have kept 4/10ths the same and changed 70/100ths into 7/10ths. Make that a plus sign. And I would have gotten 11/10ths, which is the same as saying 1 whole and 1/10. Question number 12. I could have turned 1/10th into 10/100. When I added those together, I would have gotten 70/100ths. Or I could have kept 1/10th the same and turned 60/100 into 6/10ths. And when I added those together, I would have gotten 7/10ths. On to the second page. Adding these together, I could have gotten 2 different answers each time. So if I had kept 5/10ths the same, I would have turned 40/100ths into 4/10ths, and I would have gotten an answer of 9/10ths. If instead you had chosen to turn them into 100ths, you would have gotten an answer of 90/100. Those are equivalent. The next Question, if you kept them as tenths, you would have had 6 tenths plus 2 tenths equals 8 tenths. Or if you had turned them into a fraction with a denominator of 100, you would have had 80 100ths. And the last problem, if you kept them as a fraction with a denominator of 10, you would have had 4 tenths plus 5 tenths equals 9 tenths. Or if you turn them into a fraction with a denominator of 100, you would have had 90 100ths. I realized that was a little more challenging than what we had been working on, especially because in order to add these fractions together, you had to change them so they both had the same denominator to begin with. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to go over this with you in more detail, and I hope you have a great day today.